Hello, everybody. I am the proactive caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. Because if you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. Today, I want to talk to you about caregiver shame through the connection of sexuality and even spirituality. Because as mom and I reached the later stages of her journey, many of our conversations were dominated with sex talk. What she wanted, what she needed, with surprising details. Apologizing to others about the filter being gone was part of the awkwardness, but trying to understand the difference between the mother or the strict mother I grew up with who felt sex talk was inappropriate, but eventually becoming this newly uninhibited woman who, in stage 5 of dementia, had no problem talking about sex at all. So today I invited Dr. Tina Shermer Sellers to help us with the topic of sexual shame and body image. She speaks about where it starts and how parents can learn to be better sex educators. You may not see the need, especially as the sandwich generations of caregivers struggle to meet so many different needs for their loved ones. But I encourage you to keep an open mind because you may be raising your future caregiver. Dr. Tina is a licensed sex and gender feminist psychotherapist. She's also a best-selling author, researcher, and media personality whose expertise spans across sex therapy, spiritual intimacy, parenting, medicine, and social justice. Dr. Tina is known for exposing the impact of patriarchy and sexual shame on our ability to securely attach to our partners and instruct our children to attach to theirs. Dr. Sellers' book on sex, God, and the conservative church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, has had a global impact. Her latest book, Shameless Parenting, Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too. This book was a new release bestseller in 8 different categories, which is exactly why I love having the opportunity to have Dr. Tina on with me today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Good. So this is an area I found very interesting because I had the scenario of the flip-flop with my mom going from strict to nowhere close to being strict. And as you were writing both of the books and gradually going towards shameless parenting, what seemed to be the deciding factors that led you to wanting to write the shameless parenting?
Well, shameless parenting grew out of a really organic kind of process. I didn't set out to do it, but I had been teaching sex education to graduate students, to physicians for years. And when Sex, God, and the Conservative Church book came out and was just getting a lot of exposure, I was hearing from people from all over the place. And they were saying, this has been so helpful to me. I can see the picture now of what happened for me, in the kind of bigger context. I've got kids in my life, either as nieces, nephews, or as children of their own. And I know I don't want to do to them what
Mm.
was done to me,
Yes.
but I have no idea what to do. So what I'm noticing in myself is something happens and I go, and then I don't say anything because I don't know what to do and I don't want to shame,
Mm,
right? I don't want to come
exactly.
down hard on them, you know? And I'm like, oh, sweetheart, I've got you. I will put something together. I will make it really useful. Like, I'll say, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're about. Here's birth to two. All you got to know is here's what they're typically wanting to do. Here's their typical emotional tasks, behavioral tasks. Here's their sexual and body curiosities at this age. This is what it looks like. And then I kind of walk people through what might it mean for you if your child starts to do this? Like, what do you feel
Mm.
inside of you? And if you feel any part of you that's going like this, feels a little like scared, shocked, whatever, that's, just put your hand on your heart and say, you're okay. This is
Mhm.
just showing you that you didn't get what you needed at that age. So it's okay. And
Right.
then start to kind of do some writing and thinking. I leave some questions, to help people think about, well, what might have happened for me and what would I have wanted to happen for me?
Mm.
And then at the end of that section, and I do this through every 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, up to 18. The end of every section, I say, here are the top books for the kids. Here are the top books for you. Here are the top websites I'd go to. And so it literally, I'm always saying to parents, you don't have to be any more than 2 years ahead of your kiddo, right?
Perfect.
Like you don't have to have it all figured out. Let's just walk this through so that you end up having a much more enjoyable time with your child because they start to feel like they can trust you to talk about hard things and stay present with them and just all of it. And so that's how that book came about. And it also ended up evolving into handouts for physicians and therapists and
Oh.
coaches and whatever, because they also are often getting questions, from
Yes.
kids themselves. So,
Right, because they would prefer parents would prefer them to answer the questions instead of the parent having to address it themselves.
right, exactly. Yeah. But kids really need their parents to. Like
Yeah.
if a parent, we know this from research that when a parent becomes a fairly competent sex educator, that does not mean you need to know everything. It just means you're non-reactive,
Right.
And so your child tells you something and you go, "Oh, that's really interesting. I need to learn more about that."
Mm-hmm.
Or, "Oh, well, tell me more. What was that like for you?" Or we're just able to be curious, open, respectful, non-reactive. And what that communicates to them is we're by their side and
Mm-hmm.
we believe in them. We believe in their ability to figure things out. We believe in our ability to figure things out. We believe in our ability as a team to work together. And we understand that learning isn't a straight line. It wasn't for us. It likely isn't going to be for
No.
them a straight line. And if we can stay an advocate, a resource to them, we are going to be a much better resource than anybody else really is going to be. Any other person that's less related to them, is going to be. And what research shows is that kids who say their parents were good sex educators, like they could talk to them about anything,
Right.
they describe themselves as closer to their parents overall, all the way through adolescence.
Definitely. The, the,
You
the
know,
the door of communication is open. So if
right?
you can talk to your parents about sex, then my goodness, you can talk to them about just anything.
Yeah, exactly. So the trust ratio there between the child and the, kid and then adolescent, teen, older teen stays strong. It becomes a bond that stays strong. So they're not forced to go underground, try to
Right.
find it on the internet, try to find it from a friend. Heaven forbid, think that entertainment is the same things as reality because it's not, right?
Right.
But
Right.
we need to help them understand that.
And that's why I like the way you had spoken about in your material that you grew up in a home that had sound bites of sex talk instead of having the talk.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I actually was reading an article once and the author described it as 100 1-minute conversations, not one 100-minute painful conversation.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's exactly what it is. You're learning it like you learn about anything, right? Like
Right.
if you're learning how to cook with
Mm-hmm.
a caregiver, an aunt, whoever, you're learning something different at 5 than 7 than 9 than 11
Right.
than 15, right? Because you can only handle as much as you can. Well, learning about sexuality, relationships, really what I call life education, happens in the same kind of way, because you've got to meet the child where they are developmentally and not blow over them, right? Because then
Right.
they'll just glass over and run off to play or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's the challenge too, is understanding. I guess if your child is coming to you, and I say child, it could be your teenager. If they're coming to
Yeah.
you because they have questions, then they're in that level of approaching, anyways, a level of maturity that they can handle that kind of conversation. Because I know that the
Yeah.
challenge is knowing how early is too early.
Yeah, right. Well, one of the ways to think about the how early is too early is to remember that it's not a talk. So you don't have to worry about too early, because you just got to meet them where they are. If you don't know what their question is truly asking, or you're afraid you're going to say too much,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, then you just ask the question. So let's say you've got a 6-year-old that comes up to you and says, "How are babies made? I don't understand. How are
Mm-hmm.
babies made?" The parent might be like, "Oh my Lord, do I have to explain everything? Do I have to like explain, you know, intercourse? Do I have to
Right.
explain IVF? What do I have to explain here?" And they're feeling a little overwhelmed. But then they just say, "Well, what part of that are you wanting to know about?
Yeah.
Like, what part of that seems interesting to you? Do you want to know, like, do babies come out of a refrigerator, or like come out
Right.
of the body, or what do you want to know?" And often they'll tell you specifically, "Well, I had a friend that said this, you
Mm,
know,
true.
and said, well, that's sort of close, but not quite. And then you just give that little bit more information that's going to sort of appease them or help them know that next step that they're going to want to know. Sometimes if we go too far, we'll see it in their face, because they'll either
Right.
glass over, run off to play, or they'll get really grossed out. Be
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh my, whoa,"
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and you're
not
like, "Okay, I've
digestible
got
at
to."
that point.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is what's nice about, we've got so many great books out there, so that you don't have to figure it out yourself. Honestly, you can
Yes.
get books that are for 4 to 7 year olds, 7 to 10 year olds, 10 and up, or 10 to 15 year olds, and they will literally, you just got to read it with them.
Right.
They'll literally do it all for you. They'll show you all of it. And so that's why I'm like trying to help people be like, you don't have to create this. You just got to find the resources, know just the bit you got to do, work on healing that shame, because you were always precious and wonderful, and your curiosity was always probably right on time, right? And
Right.
but you had people around you that just didn't know how to give you what you needed.
Right. And I definitely experienced that. And so I felt that shame, and I wanted different because I had children that ended up being boys. I did not have any girls. So, and
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, I was grateful that I didn't have to have that kind of talk. But then I thought, the boys have concerns and questions too. Um,
Yeah.
but I felt the shame of having that conversation, and I didn't want to pass that on, because
Yes. Yeah.
that's what I realized with my mother. The conversations we had was, this didn't feel like it was something that just happened. It's something that was passed on, which
That's
is
right.
why I like that you bring up the connection between sexuality and spirituality, because
Mm-hmm.
once we begin to understand and maybe have less shame around sexuality, there is the other side of it, that I have a safe net at home. We can have these open conversations, but when I go out in public, or I go to church, or I go to other teenage groups through school, what
Mm-hmm.
have you,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
then there's the comparison of what will they think this and I think that, and then that shame kind of comes back again in a different way.
Right. But again, if the parent is open and safe, then they've got a place to say, "Oh, I heard this, that like I'm going to go to hell if I
Right.
think about sexuality, or if I want anything, or if I touch myself, let alone anybody else. Like, do you think that's true?" They can come back with those questions if something doesn't align,
Mm-hmm.
from the information they've been told, and then something else they're hearing. Then it can be a really rich conversation to be at home. And then you can have the conversation of, how all of your desires are on point. They're like part of being human. And we have responsibilities for the choices, the actions we do, and the words we speak.
Mm-hmm.
And are they serving love? Are they serving justice?
True.
Do we feel ready for these things? We can talk about the more complex things. And so
Right.
you can say, there's all kinds of sociological, sociopolitical reasons why don't have intercourse, which
Mm-hmm.
is where you can get pregnant until you get married. We can talk about some of those cultural things that were going on thousands
Right.
of years ago. We can talk about what the just developmental side of things are. Like, when do you really have a partner? Like, when can you be with somebody because you've grown up enough and they've grown up enough?
True.
That determines a lot about, how meaningful a sexual experience might be,
Right.
depending on what kind of maturity we bring to it. So, you can have these much more complex conversations with kids where you're not telling them, because now we're kind of talking about, you're talking to an older child, probably,
Mm-hmm.
10, 11, 12 to 15, 18 years old.
Right.
They aren't going to respond to you telling them what to do. They're going to respond much better to you saying, here's what I hope for you. And here's why I hope that.
True.
You obviously spend N hours a day out in the world at your school and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
You are making decisions that I might not know about. So I have to begin to trust you to do some thinking before you do things. That doesn't mean that you won't make a mistake, but a mistake can be turned into a lesson in a heartbeat.
Exactly.
If we just stop and think about it and talk about it and figure things out. And if we were meant to learn not through experience, our prefrontal lobe would have been done baking before we were 25 or 28. So, but it's
so
not.
True. No, that is so true.
Yeah.
So then life happens, when we do have experiences that we learn from. I mean, I think we're all bound to have them. And even if we came from that background where it was an open conversation at home and life happens, there is this introduction somehow from the outside world that shame is introduced, or my body is not what I thought it was, or the body image and issues that come around with that. Yeah. So in responding to that, how can parents help their adolescents basically cope or understand or deal or heal from that kind of shame?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to understand how shame, and sexual shame in particular, how that forms, and as you're kind of iterating there, and I'm certainly happy to share with you, I have a research definition. We didn't have an operational definition on sexual shame until 2017. So it's only 6 years ago. Yeah.
That's amazing.
But it's super, super telling. But it talks about how sexual shame begins in the interpersonal relationship. So if we think about it, year-old children have just at that about a month or so before figured out that their hands are a tool that they can use. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be the thing that's whacking them in the face. They can actually reach for things and grab them. And it will be somewhere around a year old that while they're getting their diapers changed or they're in the bathtub, they're going to discover their genitals.
Right. And
that will be a glorious day for them because it's a wonderful part of our bodies with a lot of concentration of pleasure nerve endings, right?
Right.
And so that will at first be an accident, but pretty soon, within a few months, they're going to be like, I got this part of my body. It's great. Now, if they have somebody there that can explain that to them, it just says, oh, that's your penis or that's your vulva. It's a wonderful part of your body.
Right.
Then they can begin, because they're already naming the universe anyway. That's where they're doing, when they're toddlers. So now they've got that. And then you can start to give them more information as they get a little bit older and they become enamored with that part of their body, which they often are at 2 and 3 and 4, right?
Right.
But let's imagine that they're in a home that probably 90 to 95% of people in the US grew up in, and that's a home that's silent or silent and shaming. So from that pre-verbal age, someone is yelling, saying that's gross, that's nasty, slapping their hand away,
True.
and doing
True.
these kinds of things repeatedly because they don't learn to not show you things, like to go underground until they're about 5 or 6. And that's when they get often no trouble for playing doctor. And then
Oh,
that one
right.
sticks with them because they remember that one. And that's the beginning. So it's all happened in this interpersonal space. But then once a child hits 5 or 6, they're getting ready to go to school. Maybe they're watching more TV at that point. Then the culture begins to play its own game on them. You're not enough. You need to be thinner. You need to be muscular. You need to be whatever, right?
Right.
And this is how we drive our economy. We drive our economy by people feeling badly about themselves and getting them to think that they need something else.
Yes. Something
And so
outside
they
of
go,
ourselves.
right. And so that message is going on. We have research that suggests that 50% of 6-year-old girls, 2/3 of 9-year-old girls, 90% of 15-year-old girls are modifying what they eat.
Yes.
So it just goes to show how immersive that message is in our daily life, in the grocery store, on the magazines, in any form of media that is on. And now we have more media and more media,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so all of this plays into the cultural side of sexual shame, that
Right.
you're not enough, right? Boys are also getting messages too, and those messages are confusing for them as well because they're not, again, being given the data, the knowledge that they can then stand up against something that's a mythology, right? And so if they don't have that, then they're kind of a victim to the messages of media.
Right. And
And
that's
then
the
what their
sad
friends
part
think.
of it, because that's where we're already struggling enough with our bodies changing and all of the changes that we go through from, that 5 and 6 all the way to the point when we're 18, 20 and beyond.
That's right.
And so to add an outside source that says you need to be skinnier, prettier. I do remember a time that my youngest was, I want to say he was in junior high. He was younger than junior high, so maybe about 4th or 5th grade. And he hugged me. And I'm a grown woman at this point, but he hugged me. And when he stepped back away, he held my waist and he kind of pressed a little bit. And he said, "Mommy, you would be so much prettier if you were thinner." And I thought, oh my gosh. The first thought was, no more Cartoon Network for you. But the second thought was, oh no. How do I reverse this thought in his mind that women are pretty only when they're this like size 0?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. And these are conversations as part of, I talk about it in the book, like when we start media literacy conversations with kids, and you can, if you're sitting and watching something with them and you see something that is communicating about what people ought to look like or how people ought to be treated or people are not being treated well or whatever, you go ahead and you're like, okay, I got to pause this and I got to chat about this for a second.
Yes.
What do you think about the way that he just talked to her? Or what do you think about the message she just got that she has to be whatever, or whatever it is, and then you can start talking about, well, who makes TV? Who makes movies? Who's included? Who's not included? Who benefits? Who doesn't? These are media literacy questions.
Right.
We want them to learn to understand entertainment, right?
Yes.
How entertainment is produced.
Right.
Right. And it's made to look like it's a real life thing, but there are cameras everywhere. There are retakes. There's all kinds. It's not reality. And we have to work to keep getting clear about what is reality and what isn't. We help our kids when they're like 4 and they're wanting us to be a dinosaur. We're like, yes, I will be a dinosaur. Or they come home from swimming lessons and they say, I held my breath for 5 hours, and you're like, wow, wouldn't that be the most awesomest thing? I wonder if we'd have to grow gills like a fish, though, to do that.
Right.
We're helping them make that move because their creativity and fantasy is fabulous, right? But then they have to be able to get clear as they get older, right, about where it begins and ends. But we have to keep that conversation going with the amount of media that we have.
Oh, absolutely.
What's real and what isn't. And we don't in sexual health or life education. We don't keep that conversation going. And I
Yeah.
think we suffer as a country because I think we have a lot of people that don't know how to think critically and will hear something on the news and they'll think, oh, that must be the truth. We're
Mm.
like, did you know that news became an advertisement in the mid 80s?
Yeah.
It's not the same as it was before then.
Right.
We actually passed policies that restricted the FCC on being able to protect people anymore. So we have what we have, but so many people don't know. Like, I need to think critically about this, anything, just like I do about things that are more obvious that I need to think critically about.
Right.
Like
Right.
what I eat or what's in the food. Just because it looks good doesn't mean it might be healthy for me. I don't know. I have to look it
True.
up.
That is so true. And it's amazing to me that we have all of these steps in our life to learn and grow. And then at some point, we become these adults that are secure, for the most part, secure in our way of thinking or way of being, even with the media telling me I need to be skinnier, prettier, or the wrinkles will go away if you use whatever product.
Yeah.
But I realized as a caregiver for my mother how uncomfortable people are when you're out in public and it's time to talk about sex because it didn't go away. I mean, she was still a human being, and here it
Yeah.
is in when she was in her 70s and living with dementia and having these conversations, and I found myself having the talk with my 70-year-old mother who was mentally, that
Yeah.
15-year-old or 18-year-old.
Yeah. Right.
And so that was
Yeah.
very awkward because it was like, okay, we had these conversations through life and then cut. It never seemed to come up again until we're in an awkward position of like, okay, we've got to start talking about this again.
Yeah. And it was on you to do the talking,
Yeah.
which is, like she didn't know how to model it well for you. So you had been learning with your own kids and okay, now you're doing it with your mom. It's a bizarre thing, but the population that STIs are growing the most is with the elderly.
Mm.
Because when they went through, we didn't have the kind of STIs we have now.
Wow.
I mean, we had gonorrhea and syphilis,
Right.
but we have so many more now that you need to know how to protect yourself from. So they didn't learn any of that stuff. I mean, that was just a totally different time. I was recently taking care of my own mom, and she's 85, and it was the most delightful time that we've ever had because she had this real sweet innocence about her.
Mm.
And now she was a Swede, so she was one of the people who did talk about sexuality and was pretty much always able to. But there were other things that she couldn't talk about as well, and she could now, And so sometimes that happens, but we, I think, as the adult children, we have to come to terms with their sexuality if we haven't done that before.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had the good fortune to grow up with parents who we talked about these things all along the way, so that I didn't ever, I mean, at some point I wasn't thinking about sexuality, but when I knew that my parents were also sexual. Like that was just, of course,
Right.
that's a given,
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important for us to understand as humans, when we're born, we're rooting for the breast, not because the milk is there, because it's not there yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the feeling, it's the smell, it's it's the sounds, it's
connection.
all the things. It's connection and pleasure. We're hardwired for it.
Yeah.
If toddlers don't get enough touch, right, they'll suffer neurological damage if they don't get that loving touch. Well, I don't know why we don't recognize that we are the same humans all the way along,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't talk enough about our need for affirming, safe touch in our life, right? But we all still need it. But then you get to the people who are in memory centers,
Mm-hmm.
and adult children are often having a really hard time with the fact that their adult parent is still seeking connection and pleasure.
Right.
Because they're human, but if you live in a society like ours that never talks about sexual health, then it becomes this thing. I don't want to know about you, and I don't want you to know about me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then all of a sudden you're caregiving for your older parent, and you're kind of the one that needs to talk about it with them in a way that's same way, loving, kind, but clear.
And that's what happens. That's exactly what happens. So I didn't get the sex talk when I was young, and then turning around having to give the sex talk. I learned along the way. So I gave what I wish I would have received.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't stop it from feeling any awkward, but I noticed that
Yeah.
once I had this conversation with her, and of course, at this point, she's in a memory care community.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tried to explain to the rest of the staff, okay, we've had this talk, so just in case she mentions this, or that. And I noticed the responses from the staff was
Mm.
very averse to having the sex talk as well. And I thought, well, no wonder mom feels so awkward,
Yeah.
because even the others that she was around, that there was this stigma about
Yes.
sexual expression. It's like we're still
Yeah.
human.
Right. But this is one of the things that is still surprising to me, even though I've dealt with it my whole career, is in the United States, if you train as a psychotherapist, which
Mm-hmm.
is a graduate degree, you train as a physician, graduate degree, train as a teacher,
True.
train as a coach, train as a nurse, right? Anywhere in medicine, you are not going to get sexual health information or training. You might at best get one class, and that will not be enough.
True.
Right? Like I taught for 30 years graduate and marriage and family therapy students. They had one class, and I would say to them, because I was a teacher, be like, okay, this is what you're getting, but I want to be really clear about what you're not getting, because there's so much more here for you to know, so that you can actually sit with people and not bring your stuff into the room, right?
Right.
And but that's part of it, is that the caregivers in these memory centers, the physicians, the nurses, the care team, they're not given sexual health education either, let alone what does it look like to come alongside an aging person?
Yeah.
You know, and how do you talk about it? So they bring their own shame and stigma from growing up, and they're bringing that without any mediating information, bringing that right into their care.
And it's not the best environment, the best loving or compassionate environment. And then in that case, the shame, if we ever were able to heal from it, comes right back.
Right. Exactly. It finds that same place, because people will get a look, or they'll get a harsh tone,
Right.
or they'll get something that says, that's not okay. That about you, that's not okay.
Right.
And it's human.
And
It's human, and it's a really lovely thing, I think, about us.
Right. We can make that choice to be loving and compassionate, and be what we wish we had, even if we didn't get that, what we wish we had received.
That's right.
And so we have our sandwich generation. We have our parents that are raising their little ones of various ages. And then we have, they're also somewhat raising their parents at this point, or caring for them in such a way.
Mm-hmm.
And this information, God, I wish I had this book growing up. I wish I did, because the answers, the responses of, if we don't tell them, they won't find out.
Right.
Well, it's like, if I'm leaving the house, I'm going to find out somehow. If you're turning the television on, I'm going to see something somewhere.
Right.
And getting ahead of it and knowing how to approach our children and be that better sex educator, because it's not just about sex.
No. It's about keeping yourself safe. It's about how to do a relationship well. It's about how you do conflict resolution. It's about knowing what you like and what you don't like, knowing how to have boundaries, knowing how to stand up for those boundaries, knowing that other people are going to stand up for their boundaries.
Exactly.
I mean, it's so many things. It's so many things. And it's all things that make us better interpersonal communicators and friends and parents and lovers. And coworkers, all kinds of things. It helps us know how to navigate the human relationship, right?
Right.
In all of its complexity.
And in that complexity, it helps us to be, I believe, better humans in general, because then we are communicating and connecting with people of different backgrounds, different cultures, different um, understandings, and different life experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what's, I think, so fun is when you think about how um, complex the human relationship is,
Mm-hmm.
then you start to break it down and you think, oh, so if I have a 4-year-old, I can read a book on like on boundaries. But it's like I remember reading when I have a 6 and 3-year-old granddaughters, and when my oldest was 4, her favorite book was Don't Hug Doug. And it was a book about this little boy who just didn't like hugs. He liked one hug a day from his mom, and that's it. He didn't like
Oh,
any
wow.
other hugs. And it was just the cutest book. But it's like we can start having these conversations about boundaries or about body autonomy or about whatever, consent, in really fun ways because the books are already there. Like people have been
True.
writing these books, and it just makes it then when you have to have a more complex conversation, 2 or 3 years later, the foundation's already been laid.
True.
You've laid it through many other kinds of books that you've been reading and conversations you've been having.
Right. And if we can keep the conversation going throughout life, because eventually our kids grow up and they have their kids of their own and
Yeah.
relationships of their own, and that open
Yeah.
connection, communication still should be anyways, or I would hope so, is
Yeah.
still there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'll tell a funny story. I was giving a talk at a medical conference down in San Diego, and it's where my dad lived. I lost my dad 14 years ago, so it was when he was still around. And I said to him, like, Dad, you guys should come because you've never seen me, because I live a couple states away, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've never seen me do my thing, and you might really enjoy it. Now, I knew I was giving a talk on the aging disabled, the surprising sex life of the aging disabled and chronically ill.
Mm.
That was the title of my talk. And so I could see him in the back, and he just was just shaking his head. And at the end, we went to dinner later that night, and he said, I just had no idea you knew all that stuff. It was so cute. I'm like, Dad, you laid the foundation for me. You made it so I could keep learning about what
Awesome.
happens in our lives as we age and we are in relationships, intimate relationships and other relationships. Like you helped me learn that. And he was just,
Mm.
it was really cute, but it was that whole thing. Like we didn't talk about it that much, obviously, because he had his own life and I had mine,
Right,
so
right.
obviously we didn't, but it was a fun thing to kind of share together. Like, oh yeah, no, I got you. I
Yeah,
got you.
yeah.
I'm glad you're happy.
That's awesome. That you learned all this stuff along the way. Well, and that foundation that he laid was also curiosity, a safe
That's right.
space to
Yeah.
have that kind of curiosity.
Yeah. And to think for myself,
Right.
like if I heard, gosh, the disabled, they're not sexual, like what the messages that are around,
Right.
the elderly, they're not sexual, or the whatever. I was of a mind to question things,
Yes.
to be like, is that, I don't know that that's true. I'm going to go do some research and find out
Mm-hmm.
what I can find out, because I had a healthy skepticism about the kinds of myths that are in our media and around
Right.
us, and yeah, and I liked to learn.
That's good, because we definitely need to question our media, especially these days.
We
Um,
do.
it's just the nature of humanity.
Well, it's the nature of also how we shape our country. So
Right.
we make it now. Our values are that the ends, or excuse me, the means
Mm-hmm.
justify, no, the ends justify the means. In other words, if we make money for our stockholders, it doesn't matter
Right.
how we did it.
Exactly.
Now, there was another time, I often tell people, I still have my parents' frying pan from when they got married in 1958.
Oh, nice.
There was a time when the means, how you did it, justified what you came up with, your end result. You
Right.
made a fry pan that was going to last forever. You made a
Right.
vacuum cleaner that was going to last forever. We had a lot of pride in what we produced, and that's what was justifying why you want to buy from this company or that company, because their
True.
products are better.
So true.
That the means, how they did it. But we are now in a place where making money for our stockholders is more important than anything else, and it doesn't matter if it's hurting people along the way. And people may not like to hear that, but the proof is there in front of
Yes.
us every
Yes.
day. And if we're going to think critically, then we have to look at that and say, is that okay for me or with me, or
Right.
for my family or whatever?
Yeah. And it's not okay. It's just, but having these conversations and keeping it going and connecting the dots along the way. I mean, we've got to
Yeah.
start somewhere. So I really am so happy that you wrote this book for shameless parenting,
Thank you.
because there is a way to do it. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
we don't have to. I know, as my parents told me when I was born, I didn't have instructions stamped on my back.
That's right. That's right. And of course we don't. But most of us are wanting to do a little better than ours did. We
Yeah.
want to keep improving on the legacy that we've been through, right? We want to keep
Right.
doing that. And in order to do that, we've got to do some of our own work. We have to go, they did the best they could given with what they've got.
Yes.
Now I've got a chance to.
Right.
And what you even noticed, like having your conversations with your mom, that when you do have some of those conversations, there's a kind of closeness that can happen, a kind of liberation that you both have,
Yes.
like, oh, wow, look at us, look what we did. And I tell people all the time, if you want to change the legacy from what you grew up with to something different with your own kids or any kids that are in your life, you can do that in one generation. And it's
Yes.
just by having these 100 1-minute conversations that are age appropriate all the way along. You don't ever put the topic of relationships, human relationships, away. They're always there,
Yeah.
and so ways that people are. I can remember you were saying you were raising boys. We have 2 boys and 2 girls. And I remember with my son saying to him one time, he was talking to his sister, and his sister was quite a bit younger. And he was saying, oh, I'll give you this little lollipop if you want to clean my room. And I overheard it in the kitchen. And I said to him, I said, dude, so I want you to think for a minute. If the shoe was on the other foot, if your sister was, X number of years older than you,
Mm-hmm.
and she said that to you, would you think that was fair? And he
Mm-hmm.
said, no, I don't think I think that was fair. And I said, okay, I'm going to teach you something. Anytime you are older than someone else, you have more power than they have because you've just been on the planet longer. And
Right.
it's what we call an abuse of power, when you use your power to get something for you that isn't also good for them.
Right.
That's an abuse of power. And I said, and we allow that a lot in this
Mm-hmm.
world that we live in. And it will never be okay with me for you to be that kind of man. So I
Awesome.
want you to start paying attention to, how are you using the fact that you're older? Can you
That's
use it in a
perfect.
way that benefits you and your sister, or whatever? So that's just an example of a 1-minute conversation that I
Yeah.
had. He was probably 9 and she was probably 4 or something, and 1-minute conversation. But way later, 25 years later, 20 years later, something, we were talking about it. And he said, Mom, he said, having you say those things to me, different times along the way, I
Mm-hmm.
now notice my power in my business meetings and in other dealings in my life. And
Wow.
I am often paying attention to, am I using this for good of all of us, not just good for me? And he said, I wouldn't have probably gotten that message anywhere else, because that's not the message we give our boys. We tell them, you can do whatever you want to if you want to do it bad enough. It doesn't matter who you run over, right?
Wow.
And women are there to pleasure you, right?
Right.
We
Right.
give them
Right.
messages that don't help them have good relationships later.
That's
So,
awesome. How impactful is that?
mhm. Yeah. Well, and it's part of that message, I think, that our boys need, that counteracts what they're getting with culture, and that is that you're
Yes.
responsible, not somebody else, but
Right.
you're responsible for what you say and what you do.
Right.
So I don't want to ever hear, though you're going to hear it from other people, that what that girl was wearing, or well, she
Yes.
was drinking, or whatever. That no, that is never going to fly, because you are responsible for what you say and what you do, and you are super disciplined. Look at how you do this and this and this. You skateboard and you do that. Said, when you put your mind to something, you can do well, so you have a responsibility to own everything you say and everything you do, and I don't ever want to hear you
Right.
pointing your finger if you had a
Yeah,
choice in the matter.
exactly. And
And I
that's
just knew
important.
that that was part of combating the other messages that he was going to get, that
Right.
was going to say it's okay for you to do these different things, because you can't help it, you're a boy.
Right.
Yeah.
And see, and that's the important part, that parents get to set the stage for
Yeah.
their children before they go further on into life. Then
Yeah.
your son in that story was a perfect example. So then when they eventually get to that point, they have something of a comparison to say, nope, I can see
That's
how
right.
hurtful or bad that is, and I don't want to be that way. I don't
That's
want to be
right.
that person. So instead of telling our sons in many occasions of don't be that guy, don't be that guy, but
Yeah.
extending it saying don't be that guy because this is what it'll cause, or this is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. We're often talking about how important comprehensive sexual education is, each age as they go on. And we have all the research that shows it helps kids get involved with sex later and make safer choices and know when they're being
Yes.
exploited and know how to drop it. I mean, just all kinds of things that most parents want for their child, right?
Right.
To be
Right.
safe and to have good experiences in the world. And yet it is so integral to our happiness as adolescents and adults that we know how to do relationships fairly well. So core to our happiness. And
Yeah.
yet it's the one area we fail to teach. It's almost like we were saying, okay, you're going to start to drive when you're 16, 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
It's super fun. It's really dangerous. You are not going to have keys in your hand before then. And then at their 16th birthday, we hand them keys,
Right.
having never given them any education at all
Yep.
about what driving in the world means. Like, we would never do that. We would never put our child at that kind of risk, right? And yet, we do that with not providing sexual health or life education to
Yes.
them at every age. Then
So
we're
true.
telling them, the media is telling them all these things that aren't true. And then they go out and they attempt to have a relationship and they wonder why it's bombing.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, honey, we did you no favors. I'm so sorry. you know. So now you have to heal your shame and do learning. It's a little bit
Exactly.
of work.
Yeah, just everything else life will throw at us.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
true.
exactly.
Well, Dr. Tina, I appreciate you sharing this information with us. And the book is amazing in the fact that it's setting parents up for a better, more positive experience with their children. And I honestly believe we can gripe about what's happening in the world, but we can also work on changing it
Yeah,
through our children now.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you
So
so much. It was really fun to be here with you.
awesome. So, where can our listeners find your books?
Yeah. So both Sex God and the Conservative Church Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, which we'll talk a little bit about how the United States became sex negative, how it was meant to be sex positive, and how you heal sexual shame. That's in that book. That you can find that Amazon or other booksellers. And Shameless Parenting, everything you need to raise shame-free, confident kids and heal your shame too. You can find that at Amazon, as well as other booksellers. And both books are also on Audible. If you're somebody that
Perfect.
likes to listen,
Mm-hmm.
I'm that way. I will go for walks or go for drives or whatever, and I just get through way more books that way. They're both on Audible. I read both of them, and yeah, and Kindle too. Yeah, the Shameless Parenting book has a place for you to keep notes.
Oh, nice.
So like if you're like, oh, my kid said this week, I want to remember that. There's a place at the end of each little 2-year chapter or place. There's a place for you
Perfect.
to write. So that's the only thing that's different
Okay.
than what's on the obviously the Audible and the
Right.
Kindle version. So
That's
yeah,
it.
and otherwise I'm on Instagram at Dr. Tina Shameless, DRTINA Shameless, or I also run an institute training professionals in sexual health so
Oh,
that they do a better
nice.
job. Yeah, and that's called the Northwest Institute on Intimacy. And you can find us at nwioi.com or NW Institute on Intimacy on Instagram.
Nice.
So,
Perfect. Love it. Absolutely love it.
thanks.
Well, we are at this point where I am excited about going forward with this information because it's another topic that gives me hope instead of panic when I'm in those awkward situations. So, thank you once again, Tina, for joining with me today and sharing about the book and the information. I think
Thanks so much for having me.
we'll have some more parents out there thanking you soon as well.
Oh, good. Well, I'm so happy to be here and share this and to support your listeners in any way. They're always welcome to DM me if they want to.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in today. I hope today's episode definitely gave you more food for thought. If you have any other questions or concerns or ideas, you can send them to info@proactivecaregiver.com. And until next time, be proactive, ladies and gentlemen. Take care.